Tyler is an idiot, and I hate his guts. I'm singing this song because I want to kick Tyler in the nuts. Hello, everyone. We are neither soupy, but I guess we are soupy, but we're not whiskered. No, we're not soupy, but we are whiskered. But neither of those apply, really, because we're actually the super whiskey bros.
I would say I'm very
Tyler.
soupy personally.
Maybe soupy, yeah.
And unfortunately, he's Sean.
That's even more unfortunate than last time. Now, this time, we announced at the end of last week that we were going to be talking about Lovecraft video games this week. And I put it in the show notes for the episode that we changed our mind on that because we're kind of more having an introductory H.P. Lovecraft episode, right? Because before we get started on an author, we figure we might have a quick breakdown of the author. Now, if we're going to do something like we want to talk about a book or a book series, we're not going to do a whole episode just introducing the author for that book or book series. But when we have so much content that we're going to be hitting on over the next however long about Lovecraft, it's probably a good idea for, if anyone doesn't know much about him, to have a quick, oh, by the way, he was this way. He's this guy, this is him, boom.
Yeah, and that's, as much as that may seem insulting to the listener, who probably does know a fair bit, it's worth mentioning that our biggest goal with this is going to be to kind of convey what makes him special and what we find about him that makes him special, and that's going to be really important to have that background when we start talking about video games that are patterned after his particular style.
Mm-hmm. And also, it's rather important to note that we're going to give several personal opinions, and you may think our personal opinions are stupid. We're also going to state some things as fact that it turns out may be incorrect. We may have got it from a bad source, and you may have a source that says, you guys are actually wrong about this, here's what's actually going on. And if that happens, we have given you an avenue to correct us, or for you to tell us why you think our opinions are stupid. Because we have created a Discord server that we're both at least somewhat active in, as best as you can for a brand new Discord server that hasn't been announced yet or linked anywhere. And it will be linked for the first time in the show notes for this podcast and in the description of the YouTube video that's related to this podcast. And until I find a more permanent spot to put it where it's always up, I will continue to put it into the show notes and YouTube descriptions unless I forget.
Yeah, all that's true.
Yeah.
Not a single thing you said is not true.
Hold on, I'm going to try to get this right. Hold on, yeah. Don't say anything yet. Don't say a thing.
Did it work that time?
Yes, actually, it did. Very much, I heard it. It sounded
Wonderful.
like static, but since I knew what you were doing, I was able to hear it. But what were you doing, Tyler?
Why, I was lighting a match to light a pipe.
Lighting a match to light a pipe? What's in that pipe?
Why, there's tobacco in it.
Tobacco, ah, yes. One of my favorite thing to put through a pipe.
You've heard of it before, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, I have.
Hold on, I don't even
what
did I grab?
I haven't cleaned out my pipe from last week, and so I don't actually have a pipe this morning. But
I'm
one
not
of the
sure
more
what
important
this
thing.
Oh yeah.
No. You continue with your pipe. I didn't realize you were still talking about it.
No, you don't want to hear.
I don't, but they do.
It's a good point. I don't remember what's in this bag. All I know is that you made it for me, and on the bag you wrote down drugs, crossed out drugs, and wrote not drugs on it.
I didn't make that for you. I made it for Emmanuel.
Well, he never came. I'm smoking it.
Yeah, he asked me to make him a blend, and so I just threw something together. It's a high burley English, so it'll have a fairly it'll taste like most other Englishes. I think I put some extra Latakia in that one, so it'll have kind of a smoky taste. Smoky taste in the pipe, yeah. But you know what I'm saying though. Latakia is a smokier tobacco. As far as in flavor, not creates more smoke, but and also it's high burley, so it'll be a bit more nicotine content than my other blends do.
Well, it's fantastic.
Oh yeah, it should be. I never tried it, but it should be good. But anyways, yeah, the more important question is, what are you drinking?
I actually still, from last week, wanted some more Old Hammer. I decided to make a very, very basic old-fashioned with it to see how it mixes. Do you find that funny?
I do, and I'll explain to you when you're finished.
Oh. Well, I can be finished if you want to talk about it.
No. That's fine. It was just very interesting, something that you said compared to something that I'm doing.
Are you making an old-fashioned?
I also made an old-fashioned, and
Beautiful.
we didn't talk about what we were drinking ahead of time.
No,
I think
we
it's
didn't.
funny that we both made an old-fashioned.
That's beautiful. I thought you were laughing because I farted very loudly next to the microphone. Thought maybe it came through, but anyways.
Unfortunately, I didn't hear it.
That's too bad. I would like to report that this was a poor idea with a whiskey that I already knew was too sweet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is just not a whiskey I'm a fan of. I mean, even I don't go as all out with making a mixed drink as you do, so I pretty much just like ice whiskey and a splash of bitters and call it an old fashioned, even though it's probably not really.
I've made an old fashioned out of a whiskey that I don't really like because I made a mistake. I don't know if it's all Glenmorangie, or just this bottle that I bought. But after I bought it, I noticed that on the front of it, it's labeled "made for mixing," and I don't really like it very well neat. It's not very good, which is unfortunate because it's a single malt Highland, and so it should be delicious. But this must be like the nasty bits, because it did say "made for mixing" on it. I should have known when at my liquor store like charges out the butt for scotch, and this was like less than $30. But I should have known there was something up with it. But I made this is made for mixing, so I tried mixing it. I made an old fashioned with it, and it is the best old fashioned I've made in my life. This is beautiful for it.
Well, it was made for mixing.
Mm-hmm. And that's just what I did. But anyways, on to the next bait. And that's a reference that no one's gonna get. You don't even get it.
Congratulations, no one got it.
Yay! My wife got it, but she's in the other room and can't respond.
So she didn't get it because she didn't hear it. Got it.
She may have heard me say it, but she couldn't adequately respond from in there. But yeah. Our good friend, one Howard Phillips Lovecraft.
My best friend.
Mm-hmm. So, I don't know what information you have about him and about his writing style. Here is all I know about H.P. Lovecraft. He was born in August. I didn't even know that about him. He was born in August of 1890 and died in March of 1937. Which, by the way, to put that in perspective, he died before The Lord of the Rings was published, but he was 2 years older than Tolkien.
Yeah, he had a pretty tragic life, really. Didn't live all that long. Not really.
Yeah. Now, I will say this, the cancer that killed him, even in the 20s and early 30s when it started to get kind of bad, even in that era, medical science was enough that they probably could have taken care of it, if nothing else, surgically. But he had such a severe eotophobia that he refused to see a physician about it, and so it's kind of on him. And he bragged about being malnourished. He said he could live on, I believe he said, a loaf of bread and a can of beans for a week.
Yeah, here's I mean, you have to be a very strange person to have the interests and abilities that somebody like that had. I mean, like, that's why a lot of it, we kind of say tragic a lot when we're talking about authors who have issues or have problems or things happen to them. But I mean, really, if you think about it, I don't think he could have been the person he was without these eccentricities.
Yeah, obviously, there were eccentricities there, but he wasn't this, weird recluse that people, say he was. I mean, like, people think of him as this, like, dark, brooding loner that was, whatever. He spent years traveling the U.S., and what he did in traveling to different parts of the country. Actually, a lot of his the inspiration for a lot of his stories came from those travels. And what he was doing was he was visiting friends and spending like weeks at a time with his friends. So like he very much had lots of friends, and I'm like he was genuinely like, he was odd. He was genuinely kind of cool. And if you read his letters, like, you don't even have to read his funny stories that he has. Read his letters, you see the dude had a phenomenal sense of humor. So he wasn't this weirdo, And the most important description I think I've ever heard of H.P. Lovecraft was from Sonia Green during the brief time that she stayed with him. She described him as an adequately excellent lover.
Oh. Adequately excellent.
Adequately excellent.
Hey, all we need to be is average. Yeah, there is this kind of, if you watch a lot of biographies or other YouTubers who do videos on him and stuff like that, they seem to point out, he was like, oh, he was very eccentric, and like, well, yeah, sure, like, oh, he never wanted to be with people, that's why his marriage didn't last. Like, well, you talk about someone who's written literally thousands of letters to people to communicate with them, to stay in touch. People who are trying to be recluses don't exactly do that.
Yeah. Oh, and in the whole marriage didn't last thing, he got the last word on that, because she filed for the divorce and then went off to wherever she went. I think she went out west, but I don't remember where, and got remarried. And then after she got remarried, and then after he died, she found out that he had never signed the divorce papers. And so she was still married to him when she got remarried, and she absolutely freaked out because now she's a bigamist and a terrible person. That's what she said. But which she was a terrible person anyway. By the way, I have to address the elephant in the room. There are probably people who are saying, why are you wanting to talk so much about H.P. Lovecraft? Didn't you know he was a racist? And then, there are two things. You probably figured out from our last podcast that if he were a racist, that wouldn't stop us from enjoying his work.
Yeah.
And
separate the art from the artist.
Thing, yeah, exactly. But the other thing with that is so like if you read his books and how he says and what he did, a few of the things that he said in his letters, was he racist by today's definition of racism? And the answer is yeah, probably. But there, it was not only was it different back then. There are people who talked about, like, even from the day, it talked about him being particularly racist. Even people around his time said that. But it's very interesting, the two people who really were talking about that, and that was Sonia Green, his ex-wife, and she listed that as the reason for the reason for leaving him. And then she told one of his best friends that he was racist, and he stopped being friends with him, and then he told people that he was racist too. But one thing that I really think needs to be mentioned is I don't think we can particularly trust anything that Sonia Green had to say, because, like, she seemed like the way she acted and the way she was, she actually kind of seems like what you would call a modern, like what the modern day would call an SJW. She kind of seemed that way, and it's actually kind of funny. Because if you look at, and the reason why I say I compare her to that is because in today's crowd, those are the only people who would do something like this particular thing, and that is, like, and I think she called him a racist because she was upset with him and angry with him. And that's me, and I could be wrong about that, but that's from other things that I've gathered. That's why I think she took that route. Because then she went and told his best friend that he was a terrible person, to try to ruin that relationship. And that, in today's crowd, that's the only people who do crap like that is the SJW types. But also, here's another kind of damning thing that shows how terrible of a person Sonia Green was. Did you know that she wrote an autobiography?
About herself?
Yeah, that's what most autobiographies are about. Yeah,
No,
she wrote an
I know, but,
autobiography.
like, that's random.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did you know that she had a daughter?
No.
Did you know that the fact that she had a daughter is never once mentioned in her autobiography?
Uh-huh. Interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of a, even if you don't like your daughter, that's kind of a douchey, terrible person thing to do.
I lived a terrible, lonely life, Mom. I'm right here.
Yeah, and so, like, it's so for that reason, like, that's, with what context I have, and again, I'm putting the Discord in the show notes, so you guys can, by all means, go in there and say, hey, you're wrong about this, and here's my evidence why, and I'll gladly read it. And if you show me something, then I will correct it in the very next recording session. That may be several episodes down the line, depending on how we record, but the very next recording session that we record, I will correct myself, using your evidence. Or if you show something that could be evidence, I will say, hey, look, I also have additional evidence that shows the opposite of what I said, so, take either one with a grain of salt. I'll go either route. But from the evidence that I have, she's a terrible person and not to be trusted.
Yeah, and I want to say one thing on this, but then we should definitely switch gears to talking about specifics, because we're slowly turning this into a socio-political podcast.
Yeah.
It's worth mentioning...
Not where we should be.
No. It's worth mentioning everyone's favorite author from that time period and earlier was, by today's standards, racist. All of them. Mm-hmm. Every single one, period. Because you have a different time period with different values and different concepts and different things that you think. And even the people who were considered to be pioneers, we'll say, of champion of the people, whatever, even they were racist by today's standards. So I mean, that's the reason why, like, enjoy the work. You can dislike the author and still enjoy the art, because I mean, it's just ridiculous to try to put any work of history through the modern lens, because it wasn't the modern time then. There are just different things. Of course I do think he was 100% racist by today's standards, but today's standards are very different than what they would have been in the early 1900s.
Yeah. And then I'm going, before we actually get into the true meat and two veg of our discussion, there's one thing I need to address about the racism. There is one thing that he, like, you can tell from his writings and from him as an individual, something that he despised that people today are calling his despising of this, I almost said disposition, his despising of this racist. And it is true that in today's but there's no dictionary definition of racism that would call this opinion racist, but people today call this racist, and so therefore that's one of the things that, because I hear people talk about this all the time, and that was that was, he was this way, and they said he was racist, and we know this because of this, and that is, he was greatly opposed to the mixing of cultures. That is, if you're going to go join another culture, you better join that other culture. And so that was his whole thing. Because if you look at his books, who are the terrible people in his books. The people who come from someplace else and bring their own stuff and don't fully integrate. And the good people, because people talk about, like, he's racist, he hates black people. But then if you look at the case of Charles Dexter Ward, there's a black family, and he mentions them being fantastic people that he loves dearly. And they're the people that, they're not trying to change anything. They're good, hardworking people that are members of the community. And so that's what he was truly against. Mixing this culture with this culture. You're this culture, this other person is this culture. Don't try to intermingle the cultures. And that's what. So he was a culturist, if that's a thing, but not a racist.
Yeah, that's a really important thing about. He was very dedicated to the idea of, obviously Providence was his area, so that sort of New England. Particular thing. He's from a school of thought that even by his time was technically nearly antiquated, of being this of following the old Oxford scholar, a way of being educated, which is something I'm very, very in line with and very passionate about, and have been for most of my adult life, of this idea of it's kind of even anti the way our colleges are now. You should be extremely well informed about every single thing and subject, and be well written and well spoken. It's like you're specialized in something, but you're beyond decent at every single aspect of being an intellect. And you have even by he was even against colleges of the time. So I mean, like, he had this idea of what let's just say a man of Rhode Island should be. Let's just say that because, like, he even hated the way the men around him were educated. So I mean, he just had this very set idea of what he thought was the life should be and society should be. So I mean, like, everything just made him angry all the time. So when you see him, like, get in a book and get mad and be like, these people who happen to be black they're destroying, like, how can I convey that these people that are in my area and that are coming into my area are destroying? Oh, I know, they're bringing in devil worship, essentially. If you read like the horror Red Hook, it's essentially like all these immigrants who have brought in devil worship, more or less, if you're reading the beginning of the book. So he just hates everything.
Yeah, and that's the difference. Like, by today's standards, if there's a group of black people that I hate, I'm racist because I hate this group of black people. But it's not, I hate them because of the group they are, and it just so happens they were black. If this same group was white, I'd still hate the group. And that's the whole point. Like, of course, I'm a misanthrope, so I hate everybody. But
yeah, we're originally from the Richmond, Indiana area, originally, and that means everyone we hate is white.
Yeah, because, like, the 4 black people in town are decent people.
All 5 of them, actually.
Yeah, but
welcome to the Midwest, everybody.
Yeah, but
anyways.
Yeah, of course, Richmond is a town that you can hate everybody in, right? Like, you go there and say, I hate everyone. Again, when there's such a drug problem that the city has a 30% hepatitis population, everyone in town sucks.
This is true, and we should definitely not talk about this and change the subject, because this is getting very minuscule.
Yeah, it is. My bad. Okay.
No, it was me too.
Yeah,
Hashtag
on
me
the
too.
On the it's very interesting talking about his writing, because obviously he hated living in New York, partially because he hated cities that were that size, and also partially because that was the biggest mingling of cultures he had seen up to that point. And so, like, he was super angry the whole time he was living in New York. So it's actually kind of funny, because he kind of perfected his storytelling while he was in New York, but his writing quality didn't get any better because he was too angry to write well. So if you look at his older works, his storytelling has always been beautiful, but his original Providence works, there's fantastic storytelling, but from a critical standpoint, not very well written. Then he went to New York, and the storytelling improved even further, but the writing quality didn't improve. But then all of a sudden something clicked when he moved back to Providence from New York, and like his storytelling went even further to the fantastic, and his writing quality became fantastic too. And he was just like if you look at like his stuff, like, you know, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. What's in New York is pretty good. As soon as he moves back to Providence from New York, everything is beautiful. That's when you have the Shadow over Innsmouth, the case of Charles. I think Charles Dexter Ward, Shadow over Innsmouth, At the Mountains of Madness, and the Dunwich Horror were all written after he moved back to Providence.
Yeah,
oh,
and if you
also
want to talk about
Dreams in the
something
Witch
that's
House
recently
and The Sting on the
fantastic-
Doorstep. Yeah. Oh, I interrupted you.
No, that's fine, and all of those are obviously fantastic. But it's worth mentioning the case of Charles Dexter Ward. You want to talk about a story that gets into the fantastic side, because all of the stuff he does is obviously fantastic. But I mean, they're very grounded in the real world. You want to get when he's way out of the real world. Case of Charles Dexter Ward. So clearly, that's when he was like really exploring the fantastic, because he has 3 or 4 lengthy stories that are just like hard to read because of how out of our world they are.
Yeah, but the one that's the hardest to read because of its otherworldliness, but it's also one of his best stories, and this is a pre-Providence 2, whatever you want to call it, work. And so it's
Providence
during
to the
time.
pre-Providencing.
Yeah, exactly. The steam-powered boogaloo. But he and so this was when his writing, like the critically speaking, the quality of his writing wasn't as good as it could have been, but it was still a phenomenal story. But it was hard to read because of its otherworldliness, and that would be The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath.
Oh my goodness. Yes, on the plains of the Shuggas beneath the realm of Cairn, I'll look under the flying man buzzards of it, like, oh my good Lord God.
But as far as cementing the mythos, not a whole lot of stories did more than that one did.
No, it did fantastic well for cementing the mythos, and that's why I love it. But also, oh my goodness, it's incredible how far out of left field he goes with describing stuff, and it's great. But oh my goodness,
yeah, and what's really cool is a lot of stuff that he talks about. The people are like, that's stupid. This is a scientific thing he's talking about. That's retarded. The thing is, obviously, our scientific understanding has changed, since then, and his books are so incredibly well founded in the science of the day.
Oh my goodness.
There were tools. Tools that I know about, things that we still use today in things because they're such good tools, but they had only been invented, maybe 20, 30, 40 years before he was writing stuff. Like, I remember in one of his books, I forget which one, it was probably in The Mountains of Madness, he mentioned something using a dynamo, and the dynamo was invented by Michael Faraday. In the At the Mountains of Madness, he talks about the way they use the style of portable flashlight they use. And he said, something to the effect of soon to be made public, referring to his flashlight. And if you look at it, the year that was supposed to have happened was a year before that type of flashlight started appearing in Sears catalogs. The cool thing about some of his writing is he, because of how cutting edge everything that he did, was at the time. When he started to write The Whisperer in Darkness, he mentioned in the story that the Migo would reveal Yuggeth when the time was right. And at the time that
yeah. Oh my goodness.
At the time he had written that sentence in the story, they had not discovered Pluto yet. And then by the time before he finished the story, they had discovered Pluto. So he mentioned it in the story, and they discovered this planet, and he's revealing Pluto as Yuggeth. But when he said, the Migo will reveal Yuggeth, people had not observed Pluto at the time of his writing that.
I don't think people understand how much of an absolute travesty it was that he was not as popular as he should have been during his time. You realize how terrified people would have been? Everyone everywhere would have been terrified. People would have been crapping their pants every day they woke up.
Oh, absolutely. Just like you do, but it's unrelated.
Yeah, I'm not scared. I just poop myself.
Yeah. But yeah.
Well, that unless you have something else to say, which if you do say it, this is a beautiful segue into some of the stuff story-wise that kind of makes us anchor into Lovecraft the way that you and I do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all I had to say about that. The first thing I want to say about story is because there's a story that I wanted to briefly mention. If we spend time talking about stories in a later episode or something like that, then we'll go into more detail about this. But the thing on the doorstep, right?
Oh, yes. Beautiful.
It's about a man who marries a woman. And then once he marries that woman, he realizes that this woman is actually because there's some speculation that Ephraim may have been not Ephraim, that someone else may have gone into him the same way that he goes into people.
Sure.
And so for that reason, it's discovered that Ephraim was half woman, half man, and potentially half ancient spirit of some sort.
Where could this possibly be going?
Yeah. And so, no. Yeah, it could be going there, but I'm not going there. I'm going somewhere else. No, I'm making a different joke. And then it turns out that that Asenath here, the whole reason why she, I'll call Asenath a she. I'll be progressive. The whole reason why she married Ed was so
she could take over his.
Yeah, so she could take over his life, because Ed was super gullible and she wanted to completely take over his life. And then eventually Ed figures out the ruse and he's had enough, and he solves the problem. And then even after the problem should have been completely and totally solved, Asenath still finds a way to ruin his life. And that story is very near and dear to me because it really reminds me of you and your ex-wife.
I caught on right before the ending. Oh man, what a wild ride that was. Well, now I have so much of a deeper connection to that story. Beautiful. Beautiful. That,
the great
by the
thing
way,
is that that's such a ubiquitous joke that I specifically was talking about your ex-wife, but people don't have to know her for that joke to be funny.
No, they don't. That's fun. That's good fun for everyone. So let's take some of this time now to kind of. I don't care if we both take a few minutes individually and start riffing off each other here or not, but let's talk about the concept of what he actually created here with the mythos and the concept again. And I don't mean like break down all the elder gods and all that kind of stuff, but I mean like for me, when I approach something, you like to approach things from this idea of like, here are all the things that happened and they are factual and they are things, and I like to approach them from this more kind of, here's the whole thing as a concept, in a nutshell. So I kind of wanted you to talk first about it.
Yeah. So like the biggest thing is the absolute phenomenal mythos that he created, and then established it in such a way to allow other people to write in that mythos. I forget what story it was. One of his older stories. He kind of wrote this story kind of to start to establish the mythos. I think it was like the first time he mentioned the Miskatonic Valley, and he kind of wanted to establish that area. But the whole reason why he wrote that story is like someone else wrote a story, and they tried to make it into a decent scary story, and he wrote the story, and and effectively kind of like, I don't know if he directly addressed the person that wrote the other story, but he effectively said, I'm writing this story because that guy wrote this story, and I wanted to rewrite that story, but good. And I forget what story it was. Huh? I don't remember.
What was it about?
See, it's one of the first mentions of the Miskatonic Valley is all I really remember about the story.
Okay,
So it
sure,
was one of his somewhat earlier works. I don't remember which story it was. I'll have to go back and listen to it. It was it was the guys from the H.P. Lovecraft literary thing that were talking about it. But then when he wrote that, he sent that before he published the story, or maybe right afterwards or whatever. He sent out the story to like all his writing friends and even some of his people he kind of adopted as like writers under him. Like one of them was 14 years old at the time, and he sent out that story to everybody and said, hey, look guys, I created a fictional area, fictional fiction. Now here's a place for you guys to write your stories in. Have at it. And he was the like, as far as I know, the first author to do that. And that's what he created, and that's what's beautiful. He encouraged everyone to write within his mythos.
Well, a lot of his letters, a lot of his correspondence, and obviously they're all over the place. Excuse me. They are kind of not critiques as much as some giving people some leg ups and some assists in writing inside of this universe that he's created within our own actual universe. So he'll be like, oh yes, that would work over here because of this thing, and because this entity is this, that would work, and this wouldn't work because this thing is this. He was very passionate about people getting it right, but he was very passionate about them doing it.
Yeah. Oh, this is kind of a tangent, but I was thinking about other people that he kind of like some of his other horror peers, and the way he wrote and the way they wrote, and he encouraged people to write in that, and it made me think of something. Some of his stories in which the good guys win, or at least the good guys start off winning, some of the stories before they were published, they were edited by Derleth, and right. Derleth was always he was very much the because he had kind of the opposite worldview as Lovecraft did, even though they were close friends.
He's far too hopeful.
So Derleth was an extreme Christian, and so he was always hopeful and wanting the people to win. Lovecraft was a cosmicist and a humanist and an atheist, and so he
Sorry. It's very important to mention here, very quickly, because it's very, very important. He is the most impressive nihilist in existence.
Yeah.
To write these stories, he's the most impressive nihilist ever.
Yeah. And for all those reasons, his stories were, his outlook was kind of that of despair. And so some of his stories that I noticed that Derleth edited, and the good guys kind of win a little bit. And I wonder if Lovecraft was like noticing that maybe my stories will sell a little bit better if there's some triumph for the good guys, or if it was later Derleth was like, there needs to be at least some victory. Let me add this in.
Yeah, I think it was a healthy combination of both, because obviously Lovecraft and August Derleth had a lot of correspondence, arguably the most correspondence. Obviously we don't have all the letters, so we can't prove that, but they arguably had the most correspondence between the two of them, and he's the most prolific Lovecraft writer within and then barely extending the Lovecraft era, and he has he did the most to expand the Lovecraftian universe, so it's worth mentioning that he probably had a lot of influence on Lovecraft and vice versa.
Yeah, but that's like, that's what I love about Lovecraft, is like, even during the times when his writing quality is objectively not that good, his storytelling is so good that you don't even care.
Yeah.
Like he just like the dude spins a yarn,
Yeah. His style also is my favorite, because people hate the insane run-on sentences and the words that nobody uses, but imagine being like in that time frame. You're like, how do I want to tell people that someone's fat? I know, corpulent. Who says that? Nobody says corpulent. Yeah. It's great. I love that.
Of course, how most of the corpulent people turn out in Lovecraft's books, you might as well call them corpulent.
Hey.
But yeah, they and then like there's sometimes like Lovecraft has to make certain leaps, and you see those leaps come out as flaws in his writing sometimes. Like I'm gonna give In the Vault as an example. For him to like come in there and show the injuries to the doctor, and then like I assume that I assume that what was used to cut the tendons and everything in the back of the in the back of the gravedigger's legs was the bad, I forget the bad guy's name, the dead man, was his teeth. And so, like, and because it said, because it mentioned he was missing his front teeth, and that's how the doctor was able to easily identify the body. But there are a few things there. Like the first thing is, why would the doctor immediately like look at the wounds on the back of his legs, and immediately say, not think that maybe he scraped it on a rake or something and said, "Hey, wait a minute, I recognize the shape of those marks." That was like unless it was obviously bite marks from a human jaw, because if he just grabbed it and bit down and that was it. But the way I viewed it was, because it seemed like it hurt as he came out, so the way I viewed it was he like bit down on his legs and dragged his teeth down, so it would have looked just like shredded cuts. But like I guess if the idea was he grabbed the legs and bit the legs, and there was obviously an imprint of a human bite mark, then I would get that, and then it had the gap in the teeth to show that it was that guy. I guess that's believable, and I just convinced myself that it was believable from that point. But never mind. That story's well written.
I let myself believe all of those things. I think when you're starting to read a Lovecraft story, the important thing to do is that 90%, well, technically all of his stories are short stories, technically speaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but I mean, the majority of them
some of the longer
are
ones would be
very
considered
short.
novellas, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Novellas. There's like 4 novellas in his whole, I almost said discography, in his whole, what's it called?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Whatever,
Anthology,
it doesn't matter.
Kind of.
Thank you. His in the anthology, most of them are short stories. So we have to make a lot of leaps and have to make them very quickly to follow the story and still keep it short. So I let all of that slide. I don't let it bother me. I think it's useful.
Yeah.
To hit on, for me, what is the most important part, and I'm a bit of a Lovecraft fanatic. And I know that you're a giant fan, and I'm not saying that like I'm more of a fan of you, but I mean like I'm the guy who like listens to it gosh darn near every single day, and like have like just covered in Lovecraft tattoos and all this other stuff. This is my favorite author. This is my number one for this reason. What Lovecraft has managed to do was to create what is technically a non-disputable version of our world, technically speaking, in the same way that anyone's religion for the most part, and we're not talking about Scientology, that's different, is non-disputable, right? Things are presented forward that can't be disproved, and they are set in parallel with things that are provable, which is why you can kind of consider the mythos to be a cult, really, a religious cult, technically speaking. So you've got you have someone who managed to take the world and say, here's why things are the way they are loosely, and here's all the things that we don't know about. Here's kind of why we don't know about them, and here's all the people who are finding out some of these things about them. And the stories to find out these things are, I mean, even in like the kind of a, I don't want to say lame ones in terms of how he's describing things scientifically. You have the story of the guy who creates the machine, the machine allows him to see some of these otherworldly entities. He like describes in detail of why this machine allows him to see. He's like, hey, this is the pineal gland. This machine sets these reverberations out into our like room that we're in a way that activates your pineal gland in a different way that allows you to see different spectrums of light, and now we can see the things we couldn't see before. You can't dispute that. Granted, 'cause it's not provable, but I mean, like, you could walk away from that story going, well, holy crap, well, could I actually see these things if this thing happened? You can't prove that you can't. What's walking around me right now?
Yeah. And that's like and it's another thing, like, you know, another way to show like the mythos is kind of grounded in the world, even though it's not, like, because they, like, you know, their whole thing is like, at this point, like eventually in the later writings you find out that he becomes more science fiction as opposed to fantasy, while still keeping the elements of fantasy. And so it's like he everything now, like, it's now explainable by their science, the science of the old ones, or of whatever space creatures, you know, that they may be. But it's so otherworldly that to us it's magic, and we can incorporate it as if we would magic, like, you know, the thing with the angles, right? So like you know,
in the witch house,
non-Euclidean angles. What? Yeah,
like in the witch house, yeah.
And I think it's mentioned somewhere else too. Well, it's kind of mentioned everywhere, like everything having strange geometry, right? So
the witch house focuses on it the most in particular, but yes.
Yeah, but like mentioning the non-Euclidean angles, and then that shows where the and then it said every religion has some, because his idea for the mythos was that in the world of the mythos, every religion is somehow grounded within the mythos, including Christianity. So now you have Christianity, which is shown as almost like the religion of the good guys, you know, not necessarily a good religion, but the religion of the good guys. And then but then because they're the, it's, you know, but there will be the ones that are going against these, you know, evil creatures from outer space, but they have but like, you know, like, and he has like an explanation as to why, like, you know, hey, you know, the crucifix stops witches and vampires and stuff, and it's because they are in, you know, they have become, you know, part of the crew of the old ones, who seem to be completely wrapped up in these, you know, these fake geometries and non-Euclidean angles. And then you look at the and it said, so why would the crucifix affect them? And it goes further into it. Frank Belknap Long, when he wrote The Hounds of Tindalos, basically, like, the phrase "the Hounds of Tindalos" is mentioned once in Whisper in Darkness, and a guy from that name wrote a whole book about it. But it's pretty cool. But he and he went further into it, talking about how important the angles are and stuff. And so it's kind of shown that the sign of the cross, just like the elder sign, repels the old ones because it's perfect Euclidean angles.
Yeah, there's a crazy amount of ways to... It's really like a big conspiracy theory, right? Like, you come up with these big random reasons to support the thing that you're trying to make people believe. Like, whenever you hear flat earthers talk about the flat earth, they'll come up with these one or two things that are technically true that make you go, like, for like a quarter of a second, you're like, oh, okay. But I mean, that's all that the Lovecraft thing is. But I mean, it's doing it as a fictional story. That's why it's special. He's not really trying to convince people that Yog-Sothoth is real. He's not really trying to convince people that he believes that Cthulhu is real. Excuse me. But he presents it in a way that he's like, but I'm just saying, you can't prove he's not real. And he made all of it up. But I mean, he does it in just a beautiful way. And the nihilism... nihilism is, technically speaking, and I don't want to jump into this, but nihilism, technically speaking, in the modern sense, is meant to be this more progressive way of thought of being like, nothing matters, so don't worry about it. Do what you should be doing. do what helps the world and do what helps further the world, knowing that it doesn't matter. It's still technically positive. But
Yeah.
he comes at nihilism from this perspective of like, hey, nothing matters, because if the old ones decide they're going to kill you, they're going to kill you. But also, you matter so little, they'll never notice you. So, I mean, it's basically all about this one person who's breaking out of this nihilism to go and discover the things, and then in some way gets discovered by an entity, or discovers an entity, and then probably dies a horrible death. And it's wonderful.
That was kind of mentioned with really like in all the in a lot of the decent linked stories. It's mentioned in At the Mountains of Madness, in reference to the elder things. It's mentioned in Shadow over Innsmouth in reference to the deep ones, and it's mentioned in Whisper in Darkness in reference to the Migo, where there's effectively this line of, X people, whichever one it is at the time for the story, said they could, they could have killed everyone if they wanted to. They just didn't care to.
Yeah, we just don't bother to. Because what's the point? Again, nihilism. Nihilism is the real. If you keep dialing in to find to narrow down exactly what this is all about. This is about nihilism. Lovecraft was the ultimate nihilist. And you have to be to come up with these concepts and these particular things. You have to be a nihilist, whatever. I don't care. To be able to make your entire story writing around this concept, because that's the real core concept. Nothing matters.
Yeah. Well, I know you have to go pretty soon, so that may be all we hit on today. I think that was a fair introduction to H.P. Lovecraft.
I would say so.
Yeah. Now, before we go, I want to mention what we were planning on talking about next week. So starting next week, and I don't know how many weeks we're going to do this in a row, probably 2 in a row, then take a break, and maybe we'll move back to it eventually. But rather than go in depth talking about Lovecraft stories, there are plenty of podcasts that do that, right? Like, my favorite, I don't even know that they're still active, because all the episodes I listened to were from 2011, so they may not still be active, but they're good, and you should, if all you want is just people expounding on the stories that H.P. Lovecraft wrote, then you couldn't hurt by going to if their website is still active, and I haven't checked, hppodcraft.com, or look up their podcast, the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast, because they go into more detail than what we're going to, probably, about the stories. We may hit 1 or 2, but that's not what we're doing with Lovecraft, at least not right now.
It's been done.
It's been done, and been done by better people than us.
Oh, massively.
Not better looking, but better.
2 out of 3 ain't bad.
And so they and so what we're going to be so what we're going to start talking about next week is H.P. Lovecraft video games. And obviously there are some obvious choices that we should talk about, right? There's Cyanide Games, their game, The Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
There's Red Hook's Darkest Dungeon, and there's Bit Golem's Dagon, right? And so for that reason, we're not talking about any of those. Our first game we're talking about will be Rock Pocket's Moons of Madness.
I think it's good. I'm still up in the air about it. I won't dive into it, but I'm very torn on this game.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say anything about it, other than I get it. It's a Lovecraft game. You have to have this have this like this, or at least one thing like this. But it's such a horror trope, that horror game trope, and it's not my favorite thing. They overdid this in Amnesia. Oh, Amnesia, that's a decent Lovecraft inspired game.
Sure, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to be really close to the same with Moons of Madness, but there seems to be a lot of monster chases. You do the thing, here pops up the monster, run away from it. And the games overdo that anymore, and it's not my favorite thing, but I'm gonna look past that when we talk about the game later.
Yeah, if you want to see anything about Amnesia, just go watch PewDiePie videos from 2013. You'll get it. You'll get the idea. I'm not doing it. Shall we do an ending?
Like do a dance?
I was going to do a dance, but I mean, more importantly, I feel like this needs a closing statement.
Yeah.
Everyone, all we're really trying to say is that nothing matters. Kill yourself.
Also, I agree with Sonia Green. I believe on this one thing, I also believe that H.P. Lovecraft was an adequately excellent lover.
Yeah, from my experience. I'm not saying I dug up the grave in Providence, but I am saying it was adequate.
Adequately excellent.
No, it was just adequate.
No, just adequate. Yeah, I get it. I get it.
Bye, everybody.
Well, yeah. See you guys.